Hi, this is Omar. Welcome to my second video. This is part of a series of videos I'm making on each and every country. So in the first video we covered Australia, and now we will be covering New Zealand, which is even further away from the world. So whenever you look at a map and if you stare right in the middle, and if your peripheral vision is weak, then you may miss out on this large island, which is roughly the same size as Japan. So if you look at New Zealand carefully, it may seem like a contiguous island, but it's actually divided into two main islands. One is the North Island and the other one is the South Island. So we will get to the details later in the video regarding these two islands. Just to be clear, New Zealand has several other islands, but those are very small. So if you ever get the chance to see a financial report of New Zealand companies, some of them, if not all, they will classify New Zealand into North Island and South Island. So let's just start off with the history. So during this video, I'll be making some references to New Zealand's largest, or you could say the larger neighbor, Australia, because when it comes to history, there are some similarities. So in New Zealand, it had been inhabited by the Maori people since the past 600, 700 years. They came to New Zealand from somewhere here, which is, these are a group of scattered islands over a vast expanse of ocean. So actually this area should lie over here, but because the map ends over here, so they're showing it over here. So 600, 700 years ago, they migrated to New Zealand, and over time they formed their own distinct culture, and they are now known as the Maori people. And if you ever get the chance to see the New Zealand rugby team, which is you could say one of the most popular sport in New Zealand, similar to Australia. They do this traditional dance, which is called the Waka dance, and it is the traditional Maori dance. So in 1640s, a Dutchman, Netherlands is over here. So a Dutchman, so at that time, Netherlands used to have their colonies, somewhere over here. So, and they even set up the East Indies Dutch Company, which was one of the first joint stock companies. So he was here for some reason, and then he was given the task to go further down and explore Australia and other territories over there. So during that time he went here and he sighted New Zealand. So that was the first time New Zealand was sighted. And according to one of the accounts, he probably came close to the southern island, uh, whose west side is totally covered by the Southern Alps mountain range. So the western side is all covered by the mountain range, and the eastern side is where most people live, and that's where the major city of the southern island, Christchurch, is located over here. And then after almost 120 years, um, James Cook came from the UK, and he came here and he made his landing at the Bay of Islands, which is at the close to the northern tip of the North Island. And this area is also one of the popular destinations for tourists, probably because of its history and probably because of its beauty as well. And when I said I will draw parallels with the larger neighbor Australia, so James Cook, he also made his landing in Botany Bay uh, in Sydney. So after his arrival in New Zealand, 770s, then there was a period of you could say a struggle, and there were a lot of wars. But eventually, in 1840, there was an agreement signed, which is a landmark agreement, which is known as the Waitangi Agreement, on February 6th, and it is considered as the founding document of New Zealand. And this is also celebrated even today, is known as the Witani Day, or you could call it the New Zealand Day as well. So after that, in 1901, I think New Zealand briefly became a colony of New South Wales, which is part of Australia. And then in 1901, in the referendum, they decided against joining Australia, and one of the reasons was they wanted to keep a separate identity for themselves. And moving forward, New Zealand now is one of the richest countries in the world. It is a developed economy, probably not as rich as its neighbor Australia, but still in per capita income basis, depending on which source you look at. I mean, their per capita income is around 36,000, which is quite high. I mean, for example, for Australia, it's somewhere around 40 to 45,000, and even 50,000, depending on which source you use, depending on which methodology you look at, whether it's purchasing power parity, but we will not go into those details. So where do people live? As I mentioned, there are two islands that define New Zealand: the North Island and the South Island. So the North Island is where most people live. So that's like 75% of 5.1 million population. And the rest of the population, around 1.3 million, live in the South Island. So what's the reason behind that? Why is Northern Ireland more heavily populated? So one of the reasons is the North Island is more inhabitable because it's largely plains. In the Southern Island, most of the western side is basically the Southern Alps. So most of the people live on the eastern side, and it doesn't leave a lot of land for agriculture as well. But that was not always the case. In the 19th century, Southern Ireland was more populated because there's a region called, and the south of the Southern Island called Otago, and that is where the gold rush happened. And Dunedin is somewhere over here, which is known as a boomtown, or which used to be known as a boomtown. But now, over time, Northern Ireland population took over the Southern Island, and now the largest cities of New Zealand, two of the largest, are in the Northern Ireland, which is Auckland and Wellington. So let's come to the capitals now. So for some companies, the capitals are very obvious because, for example, UK, it's London, it's their more populous city, and at the same time, their financial and capital hub. Similarly, for Egypt, Cairo is their capital, it's their financial and capital hub, and their most populous city. But for Australia, most people think it's Sydney, but it's not. It's actually Canberra. And the reason is it doesn't have a long history because there are many reasons to it, but one theory is they did not want to make either Sydney or Melbourne as the capital because both of them had a sort of a rivalry. Similarly, for New Zealand, I mean, the capital is not that obvious. So if you probably ask a random person, they might name Auckland, or they might not name any city at all because it's not a lot of people know about New Zealand, and even if they do, they're probably not well versed with their cities. So over time, New Zealand has had three capitals. The first one was in the region called the Bay of Islands, and that's where James Cook made his landing, and it was the capital for a brief period, and then it moved to Auckland after a few years, and then eventually it was changed to Wellington. The reason for changing to Wellington was it had a more central location, amongst other reasons. And now let's look at the economy. So if you compare Australia with New Zealand, although you could say they club together whenever people are doing research on this area, so they can be classified as part of Oceania or Australia, Asia, but their economies are vastly different. I mean, Australia is heavily reliant on exports of natural resources. For example, the western side of Australia, this is rich in iron ore mines. The eastern side, this is rich in coal mines. But New Zealand has a completely different economic profile because they are one of the largest dairy exporters in the world. And 1 out of 4 exports in terms of dollars that New Zealand makes is our dairy exports. And there is one company which probably explains New Zealand's economy, and that is it is very rare for a developed economy to be defined by one particular company. So there are two exceptions in my view. There might be more, but at the moment, I mean, one prominent example is um, Novo Nordisk in Denmark. So as you know, as you might have read, the Danish economy would have gone into recession if it was not for Novo Nordisk, which is a large pharmaceuticals company engaged in making diabetes drugs, but at the same time, they're more famous. You could say utilization of this drug is for weight loss purposes, and that's why this one company has helped New Zealand. Uh, Denmark avoid recession. I think in 2022. Similarly, for New Zealand, one large company is Fonterra. I mean, they account for 80% of their dairy exports, and it's a cooperative, so it's basically owned by their members, which are mostly farmers. And New Zealand is one of the largest producers of concentrated powder milk, and one of the reasons is, I mean, why have they become a dairy powerhouse is like in the 19th century and during the World Wars, New Zealand became a supplier of dairy products to UK, and at a time when it was, fighting those world wars, and there were some restrictions on what it could get from Europe. So that's why the dairy industry in New Zealand flourished, and over time they have invested a lot in research and development, and that has allowed New Zealand to keep their dominance in the dairy sector, and even now, I mean, the number of cows in New Zealand, I mean, initially New Zealand was not a land for cows, but it was introduced by the British, and now, I mean, the number of cows are more than the number of people there. So now we know about the history of New Zealand, the economy of New Zealand, and where most of the population lives. And I'll just give a brief rundown on the major sports over there. So I already mentioned that rugby is the most popular sport, similar to Australia. But the other more popular sport is netball, which is similar to basketball. But if you do a Google search, you'll see that it's slightly different. I mean, the ball that they use and probably the rules as well. And who are the famous people that have come out of New Zealand? So there's a famous actor, I think Russell Crowe. Yeah, so Russell Crowe is a famous Hollywood actor who was born in New Zealand, spent some time in Australia, and then I mean, you are all well aware of his career in Hollywood. The other famous thing about New Zealand is it was a place where Lord of the Rings was shot, and which is the location. So the location there, it was shot on several locations, but the main location was, there's a town called, or you could say city council called, I'll just get it correctly, it's called Mata Mata. I mean, that's where I think the Hobbit tours take place as well. So this is the end of my second video. I hope you enjoyed it, and later on I'll be covering Indonesia as my next video. Thank you.